Hi, so I am going to talk a little bit about this article, Discovery of Vitamins. It's quite an interesting article. I hope that the slide in the back is not too bright, but I just want to kind of go through it, and I hope that you guys actually read this article. I think it's quite interesting on how vitamins were discovered. So Francois Magendie, 1873 to 1855. So basically, they were using gelatin to feed the poor, but the poor didn't like the taste of gelatin, even though gelatin was giving them a lot of nutrients. And so he raised two questions. Are foods that do not contain nitrogen nutritious? And is gelatin a complete source of protein? And he studied dogs, and what he found is that when dogs were just given gelatin, they actually died, and they developed ulcers in their eyes, which is a vitamin D deficiency. You can actually look at what happens when you have a vitamin A deficiency. When that vitamin A deficiency happens, you develop ulcers and ultimately can lose your vision. So Charles Michel Billard also reported corneal ulcers in abandoned infants, and he was French. And so the article talks a little bit about when there were these abandoned infants during the French part of the one of the French wars, and these infants weren't given enough nutrients, and guess what? They developed corneal ulcers as well. So back in the day, they believed there were four elements of nutrition: proteins, carbs, fats, and minerals. So there wasn't any idea that there was actually vitamins that were playing a role. So along comes Louis Pasteur, who you all probably know. You probably learned about him in biology. And then there's also Dr. Robert Koch. And both of these doctors supported what was known as the germ theory. And the germ theory basically said that there were diseases that were caused by infectious organisms and toxins. So they didn't even think that there was vitamins or minerals. They just believed that people's bodies broke down because there was an environment within the body there was a disease state and there were toxins. So they could identify things such as anthrax, malaria, TB, cholera, leprosy, and diphtheria, and they did a great job identifying these diseases. However, they had problems with things like scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency, beriberi, which basically is a neurological condition that prevents people from being able to walk, rickets, which is a bone vitamin D deficiency, pellagra. They could not understand these diseases because they thought that it was a germ or a virus that was causing them. So germ theory, so we had Christian Eichmann, and he observed that there was polyneuritis, which is very much like beriberi. It's, again, a nervous condition, which prevents the muscle from actually having muscle contraction. And so ultimately, when you don't have muscle contraction, you have muscle atrophy, and then the person can't walk. Okay, so that same thing happened with chickens when they consumed polished rice. And polished rice just means that they took off the wheat germ off the rice, so it was pure white rice. So if you go to your cabinet now and you consume white rice, you're consuming polished white rice. However, that is fortified. So you have fortified white rice. In other words, you're putting vitamins back into that white rice. But back in the day, they didn't do that. They just stripped the rice, fed the chickens rice, and then they had a neurological condition that happened. Ginz, in other words, challenged this, and he said that it was actually a nutritional deficiency. So the idea of vitamins, basically Frederick Gowland said that an animal cannot survive just on proteins, carbs, and fats alone. And when they started looking at milk and egg studies, they found that these animals thrived. And so they didn't know, they couldn't figure out what was in the milk and the egg studies. So Jean-Baptiste Dumas, when infants, when there was not enough milk being produced, again, this was in France, and when there wasn't enough milk being produced, they substituted milk or they made milk, and it wasn't milk in itself. And what happened was these infants died because they were looking at carbs, fats, and proteins, and the substitute didn't have any of the vitamins and minerals that milk normally has. So these milk studies continued by Willem Stepp, and he mixed flour with milk and he made what was known as milk bread. And these mice in animal studies did well. When they extracted that milk bread with alcohol and ether, the mice died. All right, so they were taking something out, but they weren't really sure what it is they were taking out. Hopkins in 1912 also found that rats did not grow well on just protein, starch, and cane sugar, lard, and minerals. And so he said that they were accessory factors. So they didn't know what these accessory factors were. And Casimir Funk proposed vitamine as what was missing in the diet. And then you have Thomas Osborne, who basically said plant and animal proteins are different. They have different amino acids. Edwin Hart did what was known as the single grain ration experiment, and he basically said, okay, if a cow is going to do well on mixed products versus just one, and actually they found the opposite, that the cows did really well on corn and they didn't do so well on the wheat and the oats. So fats are not equal. So initially, again, they start looking at fat and they start looking at protein, they start looking at carbohydrates, but then they had healthy rats when they added butter and eggs. When they didn't have butter and eggs, they had rats didn't do so well. And so these studies of vitamins keep going on, and you have Masamichi and Mori, which is a Japanese guy, who gave infants vitamin A, and they effectively treated eye lesions, corneal ulcers. You have Joseph Goldberg, who studied pellagra. So here I have a picture of what pellagra looks like if you are deficient. And he did what was known as filth parties. And so he wanted to prove to people that this was not a disease, that it was actually a deficiency. And the grossest thing he would do at these filth parties is he would consume the scabs or the skin of people who had pellagra. I know that sounds pretty disgusting. But back in the day, that's kind of how they did their experiments. And he didn't get sick. And then you had Harriet Chick, who studied rickets, and rickets are, again, the vitamin D deficiency, and it prevents the bones from developing. So they started to look at vitamins, and they started to study vitamins. And in the article, there's a layout actually of a further time frame, which I don't include in this presentation because I want you guys to read through that. But I want you to pay attention to the dates. And I want you to see when some of these vitamins were actually found. And you will find that they are not found as early as we think they were. Part of that was scientific instruments, and being able to distinguish different vitamins and pull vitamins out was very difficult when you didn't have the experiment and the technology. And now we have the technology. So I hope you found this article interesting. I think that the study of vitamins and minerals and the way people went about studying it is quite interesting. So enjoy the article.